Have you ever loved so deeply that you disappeared? Not all at once, but little by little, with each silence you swallowed, with each truth you softened, with each part of yourself you dimmed just to be chosen. And now they're gone, but the ache remains. You don't miss them, not exactly. You miss the version of yourself you gave away, hoping it would be enough. Why do they still appear in your dreams? Why does their name echo in your mind without being invited? Why does your heart still stir, as if it remembers something your logic has already buried? Carl Jung called it the soul's compensatory function. When something vital is lost, the unconscious brings it back through dreams, obsessions, symbols, so that what was abandoned might return. It's not about them, it's about you, the you that became a shadow in the name of love. Gregg Braden speaks of the resonance between heart and brain, how this sacred coherence collapses when love becomes a mask, a performance, a wound disguised as connection. And the soul, it keeps calling, through longing, through silence, through the haunting thought that maybe, just maybe, what you can't forget is the part of yourself that still lives in the memory of us. This is not just about obsession. This is about reclamation. Let's begin. There was a time when your love wasn't about being seen, but about being safe. So you learned to edit your truth. You became skilled at sensing what the other needed and offering it, even if it meant abandoning your own desires. This is how a soul begins to fracture, not through cruelty, but through survival. You weren't loved for your essence, but for how softly you could bend. You erased your discomfort, translated your needs into silence, and wore the mask of easy to love. This is what Jung called the cost of conditional bonding, when love demands that the self be fragmented to be sustained. And now they're gone, but your thoughts return, not because they were your destiny, but because a version of you remains trapped in the performance. Thinking of them becomes a spiritual attempt to retrieve the self you exiled in their presence. That's the ache you can't name. It's not about missing a person. It's about grieving a version of you who never got to be real. Gregg Braden reminds us that the heart holds emotional memories like a field of energy, and so the memory isn't just mental, it's vibrational. You feel the echo because the bond still holds the energy of your lost self, and the soul is whispering, go back and gather her. Not to rekindle the past, but to reclaim what you once silenced to survive love. There's a quiet violence in the way the world tells you to move on, as if love were a door you simply close, as if grief were a choice. But your soul knows otherwise. It wasn't just the relationship that ended, it was the part of you that adapted, contorted, and fractured inside it. Letting go becomes a disguise, a spiritual bypass. You whisper that you're free, but inside, something still pulses, something unfinished, because you didn't just lose someone, you lost the mirror that reflected a version of you too afraid to speak. Jung reminds us, you cannot separate from someone if they still carry a piece of your unconscious. The bond remains, not in the heart, but in the psyche, in the hidden corners where your voice once softened just to keep the connection alive. So, when you're told to let go, your soul may resist, not because you're weak, but because something sacred still needs to be retrieved. Closure is not a clean cut. It's a spiral. It's a descent into the self you left behind when the love became conditional. And only when that self is held can the obsession dissolve, not in silence, but in reunion. Sometimes the soul invents a love story, not to remember someone, but to remember itself. What if the longing you carry isn't for the person, but for the self you once tried to erase to be loved? What if they weren't your soulmate, but your soul's mirror? Their presence may have lit something inside you, but it wasn't destiny. It was reflection, a reflection of every place you still believe you are not enough. And so the bond never felt like a choice. It felt like recognition. But in truth, you were not recognizing them. You were sensing the echo of your own abandonment wound. Jung said that we project onto others the unlived parts of our psyche, and sometimes we fall in love not with a person, but with the hope of being seen through their eyes. They may have awakened something in you, but they also revealed the cost you were willing to pay to be desired. The psychic imprint they left behind isn't about them. It's about the version of you who kept trying, kept shrinking, kept hoping love would come once you were small enough to fit their expectations. Thinking of them is not weakness. It's memory, not of what was, but of who you had to become just to feel worthy of staying. The mind forgets, but the soul stores echoes. When a connection ends without full truth, something lingers, not in the facts, but in the frequency. It's not the story you replay, it's the vibration you never completed. There are bonds that leave no closure, only loops, a nervous system waiting for a resolution that never came, a heart paused in mid-sentence. This is the echo of the unfinished. Gregg Braden reminds us that the electromagnetic field of the heart carries emotional memories far deeper than thought, and so even in silence the bond speaks. It calls through tension in the chest, through sudden thoughts, through a presence you can't explain. You're not haunted by love. You're haunted by incompleteness. The soul contract didn't end, it's suspended, and the psyche, which seeks wholeness, continues searching, hoping to finish the emotional sentence it once had to swallow. But the closure you crave cannot come from the other. It comes from re-entering the moment your voice went quiet and letting it speak, because only when the echo is heard can the loop find its rest. Sometimes peace doesn't arrive as light. Sometimes it comes as a storm. Recurring dreams, emotional spikes, a sudden ache that feels like a warning. Though no danger is present, these are not signs of regression. They are symbols of reintegration. Jung taught that what the ego tries to suppress, the unconscious replays, not to torment, but to remember. The nightmare is not an enemy, it is the soul's voice, disguised in archetype and emotion. It does not seek comfort, it seeks return. A return to the moment when something was left unfinished, unspoken, unseen. Your unconscious isn't broken, it's loyal. It keeps showing you what your mind still refuses to hold. These disturbances are invitations, not to fix, but to feel, not to analyze, but to reclaim. Because healing does not always arrive as stillness. Sometimes it begins with tremors in the dark, and beneath the terror waits a truth that was buried too long in silence. There are bonds that feel fated, that arrive with such intensity we swear they were written in the stars. But Jung warned us, when the inner world is not made conscious, it appears outside as fate, and sometimes what we call a soul connection is actually a soul projection. You didn't fall in love with who they were. You fell in love with what they represented: freedom, safety, belonging, meaning. They became the carrier of your unlived longings, the canvas where you painted the version of you that was finally enough. It wasn't love, it was recognition of a dream. And so the bond became intoxicating, but not because it was true, because it was symbolic. The real attachment was never to them, but to the hope that through them you could finally escape the ache of being unseen. And now, in their absence, that image shatters. But the soul doesn't punish you for the illusion. It invites you to meet the one who created it, the self that longed to be whole and saw wholeness reflected in someone else's eyes. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. Some loves are built not on truth, but on survival. To keep the connection alive, you softened your intuition until it was silent. You felt the dissonance, but you buried it beneath rationalizations, compromises, and emotional bargaining. You knew, but knowing would have cost you the bond. So you chose the relationship over the whisper of your own soul. Jung would say, this is the betrayal of the self, the moment you abandon your inner compass to maintain an external attachment. The heart, however, does not disappear. it retreats. And what you refuse to feel then returns now, as thought, as fatigue, as anxious longing. Gregg Braden speaks of how the heart's field remembers even what the mind has repressed. This is why, even after the relationship ends, your chest still tightens when their name surfaces in your thoughts. Because what aches now is not the loss of them, but the truth you silenced to keep them close. The more you turned away from your own emotional truth, the more power you gave to the bond. And now your heart speaks louder, not to punish you, but to bring you back to the voice you once ignored, and the love that must begin not with another, but with the one you abandoned to be chosen. There is a myth that lives inside every woman who has ever loved and lost herself in the process, the myth of Psyche. She loved Eros, but she broke trust and he vanished. Yet the true story does not end there. Her longing for him didn't paralyze her, it awakened her. It became the force that led her into the underworld, through trials, into silence, and ultimately into the arms of her own soul. This is the path of many who carry a love that never fully lived, but never fully died. What if they were not the ending, but the mirror, the catalyst? What if their absence is not punishment, but invitation? In depth psychology, the archetype of Psyche is the image of the soul who must lose love in order to find the self. You were never meant to stay lost in the dream of them. You were meant to awaken through the ache. The pain is sacred not because it's romantic, but because it's initiatory. Symbolically, they leave so that you may return, not to the beginning, but to the place where you last left your truth behind. Because love never truly ends when someone walks away. It begins again when you realize that the bond was never about possession, but about a soul calling itself home. The one you can't stop thinking about may not be the person you lost, but the self you abandoned in order to be loved. That's why their memory doesn't fade with time, because it holds more than nostalgia. It holds a fragment of your own truth, a version of you that still waits to be seen, not by them, but by you. Carl Jung said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." The obsession isn't a curse, it's a summons. The psyche doesn't forget the self it had to silence. And Gregg Braden reminds us, the heart records what we dare not say, until life or longing or memory brings it back. You don't need to cut the cord. You need to listen to what the bond came to reveal. This was never just about losing someone. It was about finding your way back to the soul you gave away, to the love you withheld from yourself, to the wholeness that was never lost, only waiting. If you made it this far, write softly in the comments, "Estoy despierta," so that others, still navigating the silence of their own longing, may know they are not alone. There is a path back, and the soul remembers the way.